All right, so we are here ready for our fifth panel of the day, and one that is near and dear to my heart. We've titled it "Restoring Local News for a Stronger Democracy." I have two wonderful panelists here today. All the way to the left, we have Dianna Náñez. She's the executive editor and co-founder of Arizona Luminaria. Dianna is an investigative journalist, narrative writer, editor, and storytelling coach whose story of Indigenous and borderland communities was part of the 2018 Pulitzer Prize-winning Arizona Republic team coverage. She served as a board member for NAHJ and is a member of the 2017 cohort of ASNE's Emerging Leaders Institute. She's a frequent public speaker for journalism and community forums. She's taught journalism, ethics, and diversity at ASU, and is an expert in workplace standards for mentorship, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. Then we have Kim Kleman here. Kim's the executive director of Report for America. She manages a talented team of senior leaders in the organization. She's a longtime adjunct professor at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, and she's taught courses in investigative skills and reporting, among other things. She was previously the editor-in-chief of Consumer Reports, a publication that I adore, where she led, it's still my go-to for reviews, where she led the organization's showcase brand and galvanized its editorial testing, survey research, and advocacy teams to produce a unique mix of reports. She also spearheaded its digital expansion to tablets and other digital platforms, for which we're very grateful, because I like to get it on my digital device. She's also previously editor-in-chief of The American Lawyer, responsible leading editorial strategy of ALM's flagship legal brand and overseeing the American Lawyer website. So we have two very seasoned journalism professionals here today to talk about the role that local journalism plays in our communities. So I will open it up. So we can do it. We kind of talked about having opening remarks. Are we still good for that? Okay, Kim, you want to kick us off?
I want to thank you. Thank you for being here. You all get prizes for staying at till the end. Just want you to know. I am executive editor of Report for America. We are a nonprofit journalism organization with three main goals. Number one, to help local newsrooms fill their big news holes now by recruiting passionate, talented early career journalists, paying a big part of their salary for 3 years, and having them partner with local newsrooms that we want to work with as well, because they need our help. The second goal is to make these local newsrooms more financially stable. We have a bunch of tools. We have a lot of one-on-one attention to that to make that happen. And number three, we are trying to teach and mold the next generation of journalists to prosper in these uncertain times. We're really proud that half of our core members, we call them, are journalists of color, in part because newsrooms have begged us. We are trying to cover communities that we've done a terrible job covering before, because none of our reporters speak fluent Spanish, or because we've really never been in communities of color aside from maybe our court reporter or cop reporter or something like that. So those are our three goals. I am passionate. I'm just such a firm believer that robust local newsrooms are really the key to safeguarding democracy in America. So this has been a wonderful conference for me. I've met so many wonderful folks out there. You have my cards. I want to meet more of you as well. Report for America has been doing this for about 7 years. We have fielded more than 600 reporters now in 340 newsrooms in every state of the nation, and Guam and Puerto Rico, and also DC. We estimate that our reporters have written around 80,000 stories since we've started to do this. And I'm fascinated about this topic, the disinformation and misinformation out there. what we see and what I read every day from these reporter stories is just the no information that spawns all this, right? That when nothing is written because nobody has covered the city council or the education department for years, and in some cases, decades. The kinds of stories that our reporters are discovering is just fascinating. And I'll get into that, a little bit later. So in addition to sending out a bunch of great reporters in worthy, deserving newsrooms, I'm happy to say that we have helped our local newsrooms, both nonprofits and for-profits, get around $30 million from local donations. We're big believers that that philanthropy needs to be one of the revenue streams, certainly not the only one, but one revenue stream of successful local newsrooms today. Many of these newsrooms have never asked. So it's really cool when we can help them do what they have to do to bring money in. And we've provided more than $20 million in direct salary support. So, that's a little bit of our track record. We are going to be fielding around 200 reporters at the beginning of next core year, which is in July. We need to get so much bigger to really make a dent in this crisis of local news. But we're pretty happy where we've been, and we just need to be getting bigger and better.
Thank you, Kim. So Dianna, I'll turn it over to you. And I do also just want to say thank you so much for being here, given we've talked a lot today about the busy Arizona news cycle. So very aware that there's a lot on your plate always, but especially this week.
Yeah. Sí. So thank you. Gracias. Mil gracias, everybody, for really carrying the water. Today and outside of today and every day. I know that the groups that we're here with and the people that we're here with in this very special place are really trying to hold hands with our community and see what our community needs and listen. And then kind of multiply that, which is what I love, is it's not just someone in their community hearing from somebody and somebody's what they need. It's also then saying, I can connect you. We're connectors. So I just wanted to take a minute for that because it has been a crazy news week. I had originally planned on being here and spending time with y'all, but I don't think I've left my laptop at all. All of our team has been nonstop because what's really important is as a national story is told about our communities and the people that we care for and love in our home state, that we know how to share that better in a more sensitive, caring way. There's a nuance. And sometimes that nuance can get lost in a national shouting match. I always tell people that I believe local news is national news with more heart. Yeah, it gets me too. Like when I say it, and I've said it so many times, I'm like, and the reason I would say it is I started my career right down the street at the Arizona Republic as an intern out of Cronkite here. Yeah, woo, go Sun Devils. And I worked almost every community from Gilbert to El Mirage to Surprise, to Tempe, to Chandler, to Phoenix, to South Phoenix. And so many people so lovingly shared their stories and their needs and their lives. And so for me, when I would then advocate for a story to go to USA Today or somewhere among the 300 more organizations that Gannett owned, I would always have to make the case because it'd be like, so what's the national angle here? And I was like, so it's not national to the New York Times comes and does the same story that I'm pitching right now because they're going to steal it. Like we should be telling this story first, right? Because we know these people and we have respect and we have love and we should be building trust. And I had all these opening remarks and what I really want to say at the heart of what we do, because now I am at a news nonprofit. I co-founded it with two other longtime journalists, Becky Palick and Irene McKisson. They each were at the Arizona Daily Star for 18 years apiece. Combined, we have more than 50 years of experience of working in journalism locally here. And we worked to change things from within in corporate newsrooms for a really, really long time. You spoke to my heart when you talked about the need for our communities to have Spanish-speaking journalists, to have journalists. I don't like saying this. Nationally, there are less than 1% of Indigenous journalists in our media. We hired Chelsea Curtis this past year, and she is Dene, and she's doing a project that's funded with the International Women's Media Foundation to gather data and share stories of missing and murdered transgender two-spirit women. And I say that because I think at the core of what we're trying to do is build trust, build a more ethical and equitable way for people to remember that we live here with you, we love you, we live under the same laws that you do. When we hold accountable, it's because we're holding accountable because you trust us to. And if we know one thing that's happened in our nation and locally, there has been trust lost. And it's not just apolitical. It is progressives, conservatives, people of color, communities of color, evangelical communities. It's across the board that we've lost trust. And so we're hoping to rebuild that trust. And I think it's places and times and people right here as you look to each other at your tables that will help build that trust as you have a conversation and you carry on this conversation past today.
Well, I just want to take a beautiful nap and just think about that for the rest of the day, because I feel like we should just,
It's over.
we just
We're
say,
done.
we're done here, everybody. That was beautiful. But for both of you, I'm just very struck by, a lot of the conversation. Well, even just going to journalism school myself, and I think we tend to think of news as a cold and sterile product, a process and product. It's cold, it's sterile, it's objective, it's neutral, it's balanced, it's got sides. And both of you are so warm and have used so many adjectives and ways to describe your work and what you intend to do that is really the antithesis of that and is exactly what we need. So I'm really excited to have a few more minutes with all of you because I do think again, some of the conversation, even though not news specific necessarily, has been around building community and how we can counter this lack of trust or decline in trust. So yay. Okay, so now I'm going to ask some questions, and these are questions for either or both of you as you feel like you want to answer them. This is kind of I'll start with a colder question, a more sterile question. This first question says, what role does local journalism specifically play in holding elected officials and government institutions accountable? And how does its absence impact transparency and oversight of those institutions?
I'll start with maybe the last part of that question first. And, local news has been declining for a couple of decades now. What's really sad, but very interesting to see is data coming out from researchers as to what that has meant in various communities. And it's really stunning. Voter participation declines when nobody knows anything about the candidates. I moved recently from New York to Massachusetts this past summer, and our election, our whole coverage area of our whole county is essentially one patch reporter. And for the election coverage in communities in the whole county, they basically sent out a survey, got the survey back, printed the survey answers. Everybody in this audience knows that a classic story for any beginning reporter is you check the resume. Did they go to college where they said they did? None of that is being done. And I know that that's happening, throughout the country. So voting participation goes down. I was just reading a study in a journal of environmental economics that actually when there are no reporters in communities where industry is flourishing, there's more pollution, like 30%, than if there are reporters there reporting about that industry. We know that it costs municipalities more money, more to borrow money. Their bond ratings are lower when there's no local reporter there watching the till. There are so many concrete ways like that that are affected by a lack of news. But just in terms of getting to know your neighbor, which is a hugely important role that I think community journalism plays. We're really seeing the effects of that. That's where I think the misinformation, the disinformation, the polarization really stems from. Because when there's no local news, people rely on the bloviators, covering the national scene. And that is really hard. And that's some of the most compelling work that Report for America reporters do, in addition to amazing accountability work. I neglected to say that Dianna and Arizona Luminaria are going to be one of our new host newsrooms this year, and I'm so excited about that. It's wonderful.
Very excited. We're so happy to collaborate, connect, partner, right? Build that. But we didn't know we were going to be on the panel. So when I looked and this is how I was like, oh, look at all of the good spirits are aligning for good things. Gosh, let's see. So I think accountability comes in the attrition. Accountability comes in the recognition of when you have fewer reporters in your community reporting, you have fewer people to connect with. Like there's so many people who don't even know who to call to say, my local official is doing X, Y, or Z. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic. People were literally calling phone lines to say, my loved one, the person I love is dying. Can you help? Right? And they didn't honestly, were calling hotlines of newsrooms across the country to try to reach someone. When I first started at the Arizona Republic, I worked in community newsrooms that had 7 people. And do most people here know Chandler? When I say Chandler, okay. We had both a North Chandler and a South Chandler communities reporter. We had Chandler business reporter. We had Chandler schools education reporter. We had 5 to 7 people covering these communities. By the time I moved into the long form narrative team and then investigative, and even now, there are one reporter covering 2 cities. You'll have one reporter covering Gilbert and Chandler, one reporter covering Mesa and Tempe. And I say that, and that is the core of accountability. You can't hold people accountable if you don't have reporters to hold people accountable. And we have such a need, right? Our newsroom, Arizona Luminaria, covers Arizona, but it has a focus on Southern Arizona, and that's intentional. There is such a lack in that communities in that area in particular. I've spoken mostly about Maricopa County, and we know what we've seen. When you look at the newsroom, when you look at your literal news, digital, print, whatever you get, you can tell, right? When you take that and then go into Pima County and then go into Southern Arizona and the smaller community of Southern Arizona, now imagine what you're dealing with and what we're dealing with. And so the role that we play in the idea that voting goes down, the role that people play when they have no one to call to say, I need you to check into what this official or this voting agency leaves a vacuum for misinformation. And sadly, I think what it mostly leaves is a vacuum to think nobody cares and I can't make a difference. And that is the greatest harm.
I just want to underscore your comment about the Republic and how much smaller those community newsrooms are and how they've been, decimated really. And obviously this is just to call out the fact that during that time too, Arizona is not getting smaller. It continues to get much bigger. So we have, you know, a huge influx of people every year. You'd think we would be the coverage would be growing. And I think actually that the general population believes that that's the case, that the journalism scales as the population scales. And most people really don't realize that that's not the case at all. And some of these complaints that come in about poor journalism. I know, I mean, you know, they say never read the comments, but I don't work at the Republic, so I can read the comments. But you know, there is a lot of complaint about, well, my newspaper is so small now. It used to be so big. It's like, well, why do you think this happens? You know, it's not just like the Republic made a decision to make the newspaper smaller. It's a series of decisions that lead to now your newspaper is tiny and people aren't satisfied with the product. So it's like the cycle of things that happen. But I just wanted to point out that like as there's one person for two cities, those two cities have grown exponentially in that time period.
People can't wrap when I travel nationally, I was just in Akron for a journalism conference on this same topic. How do we cover elections in a way to ensure that people feel that they're not losing their democracy? And for me, I worry that we're using a term that a lot of people really are thinking about, no, my life is at stake, right? And that maybe if we can talk about democracy in a way that's life at stake, but when I go to these conferences, people cannot wrap their brain around how our quote unquote suburbs are larger than some of the major cities in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wrap my brain around it, having lived here my whole life. So I want to kind of ask a question that's maybe we didn't talk about, but I feel like you're very confident, or you know, you can answer this question with confidence. So we are where we are, where local news has been decimated in cities, and especially in rural areas around the country. And a lot of this, or maybe most of this is, or all of this is due to business operational, you know, reasons. But also, is there a little bit, so I guess my question is, how do we do local news differently? Because I don't think that just by, it's not so much, you wish it would be if we build it, they will come. And there's probably some of that, but there's there's also a decline in interest in local news, a decline in people paying for local news that has led to some of this stuff. So my question is, how do we do local news differently so that when we do build it, people will come?
I'm going to take that first,
Okay.
and then you go ahead. So I will disagree with you a little bit. I think when you build it well, our experience of the most successful of our 340 newsrooms is that people will come. I feel like people are not going to buy something that is not of value to them, right? When news keeps on getting smaller and it's not in depth. But our experience, when we have a partnership with the Investigative Editing Corps, which is a great nonprofit that works with Pulitzer Prize winning freelance editors. And we get pitches from our newsrooms, great story ideas. They just don't have the bandwidth or maybe the skill yet to be able to do real investigative projects. So we've picked up to 10 in the last year or so, partnered with the Investigative Editing Corps, and they have worked with our newsrooms and our core members and other staff members to do these great, incredible projects. One of them in Texas, in a community called Burbank Gardens, largely Latino. There was a manufacturing plant 2 blocks away, totally contaminated soil, groundwater, air with a chemical. And nobody in the community knew about it. It had been on the Superfund list, but largely forgotten. When Alejandra Martinez, our reporter at KERA, the Texas newsroom, wrote about this story in an amazing project, all eyes became on that community, and more help was delivered. Of course, it has to be, cleaned up further, but that drew just a ton of interest from that community for the radio station. At the Main Monitor, a nonprofit up there, one of our reporters through one of these projects discovered that the Texas, again, based telecom provider to main jails and those around the country was actually recording the supposedly private conversations of inmates and their lawyers and giving them to prosecutors and to police. I mean, the kinds of things that are happening in this country that you realize years later when you start to bring reporters back into local communities is stunning. A few more just little stories and then I wrote something up.
Hey,
I can't believe this.
you have me getting excited about local journalism.
There's a reporter at a little for-profit paper in South Carolina called The People Sentinel. He's the first one to cover the city hall in Allendale County in 10 years. He goes to a city council meeting where this is supposed to be the last meeting of the mayor who was voted out of office. Another mayor was going to join. And she simply canceled the meeting at which the next mayor was going to be sworn in. And you know what? You can't do that. And because he was there and wrote about it, okay, there's a new mayor now, but who knows how long that would have continued there. In Ouray County, Colorado, the staff wrote a story about a rape allegation and rape charges against two guys. The rape supposedly happened in the home of the police chief. The police chief was not implicated in that, but wrote a front page story, put it out there. It's a paper, newspaper, and somebody stole every copy of that story of that newspaper. They wrote something online about it. And we promoted that social media post. They got a ton of money to reprint that edition, but that is the kind of stuff going on in America. And that's just where we are, not in the 10,000 other newsrooms that really need the help of more reporters. So it's amazing, but it just redoubles the effort of our core members and our host newsrooms that like we just have to pour more attention to this.
Thank you. That's very exciting. I love that. So with partnering with RFA and hiring a reporter that will start this summer, we will be a team. I hope I get this right because I always mess it up. 7 full-time journalists, freelancers, interns, and in addition to that 7, but with that 7, we now become the largest nonprofit newsroom, digital nonprofit newsroom in Arizona outside of NPR, NPR affiliates. It's crazy and wonderful, crazy, wonderful. So when you talk about if we build it, will they come? If we meet them first and we help them say that they're building it with us, then they come with us. And that's at the core of what we've done. We did many interviews with people about what they were getting, what they needed more of. There was feedback that they wanted to know more about the education system, but funding from a funding perspective. We've heard that they want to know civic news, but that not in this shouting political way. So, and I was just at that conference I was telling you about, and there's this big study about how there's a core group of people that are shouting news and very stubborn about what they believe. And then there's this larger core that is almost afraid of the word politics. But they want to know and learn. We've heard this same thing. So we actually don't have a tab on our page that says politics. We have community. And many of the stories that we've published in the last couple of days had community tags on them. When you see like the little label, what is this under? We have equity. Most people care about people and wanting equity, education. With these reporters, there have been stories about Pima County Jail having one of the highest death rates in the nation, that we're not being told in that way. And yet there were people in the community who were mothers of children who had died in Pima County Jail, who were going to meetings, trying to be heard. And that's what building with means. We held a forum. The sheriff originally was going to be there and then last minute pulled out. There was still mothers that came and spoke. There was a story about how the Carolina Cuellar did, former RFA reporter that we hired. We got tips that in the state closing down some of the fraud schemes for rehab centers across, right? Remember this? But people weren't getting the notice that they were supposed to get. And so she went down there because she speaks Spanish. She was able to speak to people in Spanish as well. I think we call it in-depth news. We call it people-centered news. And I want to say what this means. If you look at our stories, many of them will actually start with a person because most people have an opportunity to meet who they know is their neighbor and learn about what that person is going through. And then say, oh my gosh, that could be my sister. That could be my dad. That could be my mom. And at the core, that could be me. And then once they are hearing that person and thinking about that person who lives in their state or in their city or in their town, they can then learn about the issue at its heart. And I think that's really important. I think that when we talk about what we're building, that when we center people and their stories, because if they do not share their stories with us, we have no story to tell, right? We can call a bunch of officials and write what officials say, but at the heart, it's people who are impacted by policies, by a lack of services, by a lack of understanding. And I think that's core. And we had someone email us. He said, I've never done this before, never sent it, but I needed to do this because I kind of turned away from news. I didn't know what I was missing. I couldn't put my finger on it until I found you guys. And we have no paywall. It's just, we're a nonprofit newsroom. We believe very much that everybody needs to read the news. As much funding as we can get, which we try, and we don't have enough yet. We publish a lot in Spanish as much as we can. We're translating 2 stories right now about the abortion ruling. Those will be in Spanish soon, hopefully today or tomorrow. This past year, the Daily Star shut down its Spanish language. La Estrella. It's very upsetting for me because I think about how much that information is needed in our communities, and in an election year, how much misinformation there is in those communities. And so this gentleman who wrote and said this, he said, I didn't know what I was missing until I saw what you guys were doing. And I'm kind of like a cynic about like branding and taglines, but then I also saw at the top, you say, we light the path so you can take action. And that was like, that's what I try to remember every single time. We are doing more incremental now because our communities have asked us for it. So when we say, how do you like we build with, we're hearing that they wanted more of these kind of incremental daily updates on things that they could know way ahead of time. But that incremental coverage, and you guys have done this long enough, you know, you really can't do the big, in-depth, huge project investigative reporting unless you've already been doing the beat work.
So we have, a note to end on, I think. This has been very inspiring, and I think I'm seeing a lot of people nodding in the audience. So I want to ask, because Dianna, you mentioned at the beginning, and I don't remember your words exactly, but it was something to the effect of the connection and then the building of the network. And it occurs to me that we're a network of people in this room, but many of us are pretty darn well connected in different ways. And so I want you to tell us what we can do collectively to help support local journalism so that some of these voids that you're talking about can be filled. Because I do think that there's actions we can take, you know, in some pretty specific ways, but also general ways. And how can we tell people about your work that would be how can we support you?
Can I go first on this?
Sure. Share read and share. I know that sounds like really base level, but a lot of local newsrooms do not have funding to be doing these huge, massive ad campaigns, right? To even say that we're out here, right? And so when you're a startup nonprofit newsroom, we just turned 3. And yes, we're a toddler. We're feisty. Share that information, share that trust, share so that more people like this gentleman who happened to find us because someone decided to share a story with him. And then he read a bunch more stories and now he's a member. Just totally by coincidence, a reporter went out to cover an environmental event, kind of a gathering of a civic event, community people. And she interviewed a bunch of different people, went to the panels, filed her story, and she started out with what was a more traditional news feed, but in there she had this great anecdote about Rosemary. And Rosemary had this idea, people were pitching their ideas, and she said, what if we did the neighborhood safety groups, but instead it was a neighborhood safety for your neighbors, like somebody who can't pay rent that month that we can know and help, somebody who isn't able to get a ride to a doctor, we could know and see if and it was so incredible. And I was like, this is your top. Rosemary's it. And then it wasn't until later I realized that Rosemary was one of our members. She had joined. So you can become members, you can share the information, and you can become connectors for resources. That resource is great when it's funding, but we have so many resources. My grandparents were immigrants, Mexican farm workers, and my grandmother had this great saying that I don't have anything. We don't have much. But if we all share the little bit of nothing that we all have something. It was just like, I've got one tortilla, you've got one tortilla, you've got frijoles. Okay, we've got a whole meal, right? And so I think that that's really what it is. It's sharing resources with each other and understanding. When Chelsea interviewed for our reporting job last summer, she came for what was a general beat, because with such a small team, you got to kind of cover what your community needs at that moment. But she pitched this entire, I hope she doesn't mind that I'm sharing this. She pitched this entire other really incredible project about database and stories for missing and murdered Indigenous people, right? And I was like, it sounds like that's what you want to do. And she was like, well, I want to work for you guys, but yeah, that's what I want to do. And I was like, you are so incredibly awesome for like sharing what it is that you really think we should be doing, what you know from your communities, because you know your communities. We met someone from the National Women's Media Foundation and not too long ago who said that they were looking at different projects, indigenous-led journalism projects. What if we connected? And she said, that would be fantastic. So we asked them and they first came back and were like, sure, you know, like, you guys looking for like $5,000? They're like, we're looking for more like at least 50,000 for a whole salary. And they were like, whoa, okay, we'll go back and talk to our people. And they came back and they were like, we can do it. Yeah. So connectors, resources.
Okay, for me, you can do 3 things. Number 1, you can take my business card. I got new ones for this event. So, and number 2, please encourage your local newsroom, any local newsrooms you know, to apply to Report for America, as well as journalists. We take journalists of all ages, and the experiences are incredible. And the third thing I would say would be to support your local newsroom with a subscription or a membership, because they're really counting on all of us. So thank you.
Thank you both. This is a tremendous conversation, and I think a good, actionable, positive, hopeful note to end the day on. So thank you for your time. Yeah, I think it's